Time for this week's edition of the Mailbag. I'm going to start off with an email. It says, "Hi John, just wanted to reach out and firstly thank you for some awesome videos you put up on the YouTube page. Your teaching methods and explanations are so simple and clear to understand." Well, somebody obviously likes what I do. I just watched a great video on aggregate devices for the Mac inside Ableton Live. I appreciated it was a while ago, but I'm hoping it is still relevant for me today. Long story short, I just last week decided to invest in a Soundcraft Signature 12 MK12. I'm really excited to be starting a hybrid digital analog route, but I have encountered a couple of stumbling blocks when trying to get the setup I require. Basically, I wanted to integrate the mixer with my Sapphire Pro DSP24 along with 3 keyboards, an outboard, exciter, a triple monitor setup. The problem I'm getting, which I thought would be an easy one to fix, is it was my intention to hook up the mixer to the Focusrite and utilise the USB return functions as well as the EQ, mics and preamps to the Soundcraft. But I can't seem to get them talking or working together. Maybe you be thinking, why do I need the Focusrite still? Well, at present I have 3 sets of monitors plugged in for switching as a reference monitors. I just wonder whether you could tell me what you're thinking about using aggregate dice setup would solve the problem. Cheers, Russ. Now, this is something that a number of people come across all the time, and it's all to do with you've got multiple input devices, you've got multiple output devices, and the problem is that you can't get the inputs you want going to the outputs you want. What you have to do is you effectively have to treat your computer and your digital audio interface effectively as another mixing desk, and you have to set it up as such. That's kind of the ethos, I suppose, that you have to think about when you're doing this. So in a mixing desk, what you would do effectively is you would sort of group your things together into bus, but you effectively have all your inputs coming in, and then you would assign those inputs to outputs, and that allows you to drive different monitors and different speakers and stuff like that. Main mix out to the main speakers. So if you're thinking about that sort of thing, you're effectively moving that analog world into this digital world, which is the computer. Now, the thing that people don't seem to understand, and they seem to struggle a lot, is that with a computer, every time you plug a USB device in, it presents itself up as a different set of inputs. And the doors themselves struggle with multiple inputs in terms of being able to deal with it. So there are a couple of ways of dealing with it. One is to sort of effectively you can go and buy some audio mixing software, and effectively you can assign all the inputs to the inputs on the mixer, and then assign the mixer faders to the inputs on your door. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, which is sort of the way I do it, which is effectively I build an aggregate input and I have all my inputs together, and then I present one effectively input to the door, and it can read all the channels. Now what you have to then be careful of is you then have to know which channels are which. So you need to know that channels 1 to 4, for argument's sake, are this synthesizer, channels 5 to 8 are this synthesizer, channels this to that are something else. So if your Soundcraft mixer, for argument's sake, were to present 24 channels, then you've got 24 channels coming into the in, and then how you're presenting your outputs, either through the Focusrite or the mixer, you effectively have to aggregate them together, so they present effectively as one output bus, and then you can assign your outputs, or you can assign from your inputs to your outputs, and then it will come out the right piece. It is a piece of, and the way I would say this, and this is what I responded to Russ, is, hi Russ, thanks for the email. It's picture speaks louder than words. Can you draw what you're trying to do? Now, what I tend to do when I'm doing this sort of thing, and I'm trying to work this out, I draw it. I'm very visual from that point of view. My brain works in a very visual way when I'm trying to work this stuff out. At a simple level, an aggregate audio setup will allow the mixer and the Focusrite inputs to be available to the door for routing. In this setup, you can route separate signals to different outputs. Of course, this is theory, and it assumes that the mixer and audio mixer and audio input device play nicely together. So that's the other key issue, is they may not play nicely together. There's many a time, not so much now. I think manufacturers have moved away from sort of the classic sort of legacy driver scenarios. But back in the day, you could have two pieces of equipment, both plugged into a computer, both would work beautifully independently with that computer. Plug them both in together, not a sausage. They would just interrupt each other. And I actually, this is going back quite a few years, I actually had a friend who actually ended up having to have 3 computers in his studio for specific pieces of equipment, because they would not talk to each other. You could not install them on the same piece of equipment. They just did not like to coexist. So, there you go. Hopefully that's answered your question in a very roundabout way. Okay, next one comes from Deviant Dutch. What a great YouTube name. Right, in response to Mac, how to configure the aggregate inputs, another aggregate input on outputs on your Mac. Great tutorials you have here. I stumbled across this particular one while searching for routing outputs on MacBook, and I was hoping to find a simple solution to, I guess, a simple problem. Essentially, I need to be able to separately route system audio from the MacBook, such as Spotify or YouTube, to the headphone output while the audio is sent to my TD50 module, which is actually coming from Superior Drummer, triggered by the same TD50. Need to have its own output XLR. I need to separate these 2 audio outputs to their dedicated input channels on the Behringer mixer. But now all the audio seems to be routed through the TD100. Hopefully my question makes sense. So, again, in fact, actually, it's sort of like I didn't actually mean to do 2 of the same topic one after the other. I literally picked the email one up, and then I've automatically gone in and picked this one up as well. So my answer was, what you haven't said here is you haven't said how you're routing things. Now I'm going to assume the Behringer mixer is coming in via USB audio interface into the computer. I suspect your TD50 is also being triggered into the mixer, into your computer via some sort of USB interface. So again, coming back to, with the inputs, the door itself and the routing from the door itself is being confused. So it needs to understand all the inputs it's got available to it so it can route them somewhere else. And again, this comes back to probably what I said in the last video, is understanding what your inputs are to be able to assign your outputs. So my suspect is that the door is seeing the TD50 as the primary output source, and therefore that's why it's routing all the audio to that source, because it can't see any other output sources on your computer. Now, if you want to use the headphones, then what you have to do is you have to make the headphones part of the aggregate output. So you have to combine them together, and then you can route to the headphone socket. Now, I must admit, things like Spotify and YouTube are nightmares to route, but it doesn't mean you can't route them. It's just that they're in the way they're set up, they are expecting to use the default mechanism. There is no way within the applications themselves to send the messages to an other alternative source than the default source. If the default source is seen to be your TD50, then that is where it will send the outputs to. If you aggregate the outputs across your Behringer and your TD50, then you probably will be able to route them into the Behringer and out that way, or into the headphone socket. I'm hoping that makes sense. But again, what you need to do is, with all these things, what I would say is draw out what you're trying to do. So draw out all your input sources and all your output sources, and then effectively work out how to aggregate them together, or use a piece of software on your computer that would allow you to link all the inputs and outputs. Now, Macs work in a completely different way to PCs, by the way, so be careful on that. but the concept is still the same. It's nice to know I get things wrong occasionally, or I suspect I get things wrong. So this one comes from Jamie Collins. Right, wrong, didn't work. In response to the Roland TR-8 factory reset video I did. So you haven't given me any more details, and he admits that actually because he's responded. So I'm going to read his response out because it only came through this morning. I said, unfortunately, you haven't given any details of what hasn't worked. I'm assuming you're using the TR8, not TR8S, because there is a subtle difference between the two in terms of how you do the factory reset. And also, you're trying to reset the machine back to. Are you trying to reset the machine back to patch level 1.0? Because if you're trying to do that, then this process won't work. It will always set itself back to the factory defaults of the patch level you're at. Okay, so if you've moved your machine on from patch level 1 to patch level 2, you can never get it. You can't go, as far as I'm aware, you can't go back to patch level 1. I suspect you probably could reload the bin files. Roland support could probably walk you through that, but I suspect you'd have to do all kinds of jiggery-pokery to make it work. In essence, the way that Roland have built the boutique stuff, if I'm honest, is it uses effectively like a bootloader. And you put the machine into a specific mode, and then you drop a file into an area, and as soon as it sees a file in that area while it's in that mode, it basically opens the file up and reads it. So you could probably make machines do all kinds of weird and funky things if you knew how that file needed to be constructed. It's very similar to the way that firmware and Linux kernels have been updated in the past, which is not surprising because I suspect all the boutique stuff has some sort of Linux lineage in there, given the way it works. So that's sort of kind of a problem if you're trying to do that. The other thing it does, it wipes all the memories. So it does wipe all the memories, put all the factory resets back in the memories. But obviously, it's not going to. So if you do a factory reset, you're going to lose everything. So what I said was, tell me where in the video you think I've gone wrong, because as you can see in the video, I do things very, very simply. You see my finger pushes and etc. So Jamie actually did respond, and he wrote, and I'm going to have to read this off screen. Thanks for your quick response. I guess I'm left with an abrupt and careless response, LOL. So yeah, it was a bit abrupt. For some reason, the kick is louder on the beat 2 and 4. Also, I can barely hear the hi-hats. Something is wrong in the volume setting for the kick and the hi-hats. And I do have an older TR8 model, not the new one. So that's really interesting. One of the things I would try here, I know this sounds Mickey Mouse, is have you made sure that you haven't got accents on the 2 and the 4 beat? I suspect not. I don't suspect that's the issue. Just make sure you haven't got accents switched on or something silly like that. If it is continually to do it, then I probably would ring Roland tech support, because I have to be honest and say, on my machine, I am not experiencing that. So it's possibly that you have a faulty something or other that's not quite behaving correctly. So yeah, I would probably get on the phone at Roland tech support at this point. Okay, final one for this session. And this was from Hani NCO. And he writes, in response to Roland D70 reloading the factory presets. Hi, just wanted to know how the D70 can produce a sound on that condition. I assume before you've reloaded the factory presets. I mean before reloading the factory presets. So I think you have to work out where your starting position is from. So let's face it, your D70 is going to be second hand now because you can't buy them anymore. So you've got a D70 and somebody has been playing around with that D70 before you got it. Therefore, there's going to be a bunch of sounds in the sound banks. So before you do a factory reset, those sounds will play. Once you've done a factory reset and reloaded the factory sounds will effectively overwrite what you've got in the memory, and therefore the factory sounds will play. So I hope that sort of answers that question. If you're approaching it from the position that your D70 has a dead battery, or you've had to replace the battery, then and you haven't backed up what's in the memory, then what effectively a lot of the keyboards from this era did is they effectively went into what I call a default tone, which is the factory effectively put a default tone into all banks, and it will therefore play that tone, irrelevant of what bank or tone or whatever you chose. And then by reloading the factory presets, it will overwrite those locations with the actual preset sounds, and the D70 will effectively spark back to life. I'm hoping that's the answer to the question you've asked. Remember, hit that like button if you like what you saw. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified about more rants, more mailbag, more questions and answers, and more videos about this sort of stuff when it's loaded to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.